A few bad apples. That's typically how law enforcement officials describe officers who get into trouble. But it might surprise you to learn that there is an actual list of bad apples with 76 names of local law enforcement employees. All but 2 have quit or been fired. On Your Side's Ann Schindler investigates why these officers are still on the beat.
My experience over 35 years is the vast majority of law enforcement officers are honest. Absolutely.
Attorney Tom Bell represents criminal defendants, but he still depends on the word of honest cops.
There's kind of been a presumption that police officers are going to be reliable and truthful.
That's not always the case.
Here to announce the arrest of an employee, 5-year police officer with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office.
When a law enforcement employee is charged with a crime or disciplined for lying, they're considered damaged goods, a liability to prosecutors. They're placed on what's known as the Brady Giglio list, a list of officers whose problems could affect their credibility in court.
It's not as if it's an option.
Chief Assistant State Attorney Lee Hutton says they created the Brady list because prosecutors are required to disclose anything about an officer's credibility that might benefit a defendant.
Criminal activity, bias, and truthfulness are probably the big 3.
That's a huge deal in the legal community. Well, I take that back. It's a huge deal in the defense legal community.
Attorney Melinda Patterson says having a Brady List officer involved in a case is a red flag.
As a defense attorney, we're supposed to be able to read an arrest report and go off of that information as being credible. If a Brady officer is a key witness, it can compromise the entire case.
That case is going to be dismissed, and that certainly has happened in the past.
It's rare. Brady List officers aren't typically making new arrests. Every officer on the list has either quit or been fired. All but 2. One got a DUI in 2018. The other is more complicated.
Fortunately, it comes down to credibility. Is he telling the truth or not?
Attorney Anthony Rosati has strong feelings about that second officer on the Brady List. He's the reason he's on it. Sergeant J.C. Nobles was placed on the list in 2018 after a judge wrote a 13-page order finding him untrustworthy.
I was shocked to see that. You don't see too many orders where a court will come out and say that officer is not credible.
At issue was whether Nobles had probable cause for a traffic stop. Nobles claimed the driver ran a stop sign, nearly hit his police car, and fled. Witnesses told a very different story of an unprovoked stop that ended with officers beating the man whose face, even prosecutors agreed, was bruised and swollen in his mugshot. The key to the case was Noble's detailed description of the traffic stop, which he even diagrammed during his sworn deposition.
If he's going westbound, the traffic stops go away. So he had to change the story.
Nobles told the judge he realized immediately after he gave that deposition that he'd gotten it wrong, but didn't tell anyone, including the prosecutor, until a year later.
Did he or did he not run a stop sign? Did he or did he not almost crash into the officer? Did he or did he not have a seatbelt on? And all 3 of those issues, the judge found that he did not believe Sergeant Nobles.
In his order, Circuit Judge Bruce Anderson said Nobles' testimony was specifically not credible. He said the sergeant did not seem to have an accurate memory, was evasive, confrontational, argumentative, and non-responsive during cross-examination. And because he found Nobles, quote, completely and materially changed his sworn testimony about what led to the traffic stop, the judge threw out the case.
Bottom line, that was an extraordinarily courageous order. In 35 years, I don't think I've ever seen an order where a judge just expressly finds the officer's testimony can't be believed.
Nobles declined our interview requests, but former police union president Steve Zona faults the judge, not the officer.
I'm not saying he's a horrible judge. I don't have faith in his ruling that that officer was not credible, and I think he's wrong.
Rather than being deceptive at his deposition, Zona says Nobles was simply poorly prepared.
He got confused in his deposition, it's plain and simple. And when he got confused, that's when he gave the incorrect testimony in his deposition.
JSO Internal Affairs investigators agreed that the incident showed a lack of preparation, not dishonesty. For that, and for failing to correct his mistake for a year, he was disciplined with formal counseling. Jacksonville Sheriff Mike Williams declined to be interviewed for this story. He also did not answer 10 questions we sent to him, including whether he'd ever read the judge's order or if being on the Brady list changes an officer's assignment.
A finding of untruthfulness is typically, my experience is that that officer is either going to resign or be fired.
The fact that Nobles continues to work patrol is unusual, simply because most Brady officers are no longer officers.
An officer is on a Brady list or doesn't have credibility.
Ann Schindler, First Coast News.
Why are they still employed?
On your side.
Now, according to available records, in his nearly 20 years with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, Sergeant Nobles has accumulated 65 discipline complaints, including the most unnecessary force complaints of any officer. He has also been involved in 5 officer-involved shootings, more than any other active duty officer. That has some questioning, why is he still on the force?
You want the community to talk about the violence that's going on in the community, but do you want also the community to talk about the bad cops that are in the street? And if you do, then you need to listen.
You can find that and much more from our 6-month investigation into the Brady List officers with this story on our website, firstcoastnews.com. Well, tonight, a list of troubled Jacksonville Sheriff's officers is shrinking. This after a Jacksonville judge who found a JSO sergeant, quote, evasive and not credible, is now revising that opinion. The judge's new order means the sergeant whose dubious testimony destroyed a 2018 criminal case is coming off what's called the Brady List of problematic police officers. In this exclusive follow-up tonight to a First Coast News investigation, On Your Side's Ann Schindler reports on how this strange turn of events is literally rewriting history.
I've never seen anything like that.
The idea of filing a new motion in a closed case is beyond weird, according to Jude Facciadomo, president of the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
It's not a case. It doesn't exist anymore.
The unusual motion asks Judge Bruce Anderson to clarify his 2018 order, finding an officer so unreliable he dismissed the case. In the order, he called Sergeant J.C. Nobles evasive and not credible, saying he, quote, completely and materially changed his sworn testimony.
He's lying, is what it said.
It was an honest mistake.
Sergeant Nobles has declined our requests for comment, but former FOP President Steve Zona defended Nobles in this December interview, saying he was trying to correct his testimony, not fabricate it.
He got confused in his deposition, it's plain and simple. And when he got confused, that's when he gave the incorrect testimony.
From the very beginning, once the court issued an order, Sergeant Nobles had objected to being placed on the Brady list.
Chief Assistant State Attorney Lee Hutton filed the motion for clarification.
There was a decision made to see if we could get further clarification from the court to make a determination whether Sergeant Nobles should remain on the list or not.
The state attorney's motion for clarification is in so many words saying, hey, Judge, is it okay for us to take him off this Brady list now? Which would be wildly improper. That's where his name belongs based upon the judge's original ruling.
5 days later, Judge Anderson issued an order saying he, quote, neither believed nor found that Sergeant Nobles lied and never intended for his order to have, quote, any import beyond the 2018 case. Then, having provided that clarification, the judge denied the motion for clarification. He said he, quote, lacked jurisdiction in the case nearly 4 years after the state of Florida dropped the charges.
Based on the clarification from the court, then there was no longer an issue with regard to credibility as far as whether he intentionally lied or was intentionally deceptive, and so we removed him.
Facciadomo believes Brady rules are strict enough that even the act of removing an officer from the list would itself have to be disclosed.
I completely disagree with that. I mean, once the court entered the order for clarification, that dispelled the issue for why Sergeant Nobles was on the list in the first place, and so it was no longer Brady.
On Monday, Nobles' name came off the list for good.
That doesn't make any sense at all. Credibility is credibility, and it applies to the person, not the situation.
Ann Schindler, First Coast News, on your side.
We have an update now on an ongoing First Coast News investigation. Outcry growing over a decision to remove the name of a Jacksonville sheriff's officer from a list of troubled cops. As we've been reporting, Sergeant J.C. Nobles was recently taken off the so-called Brady list after a judge revised his 2018 opinion that the officer was, quote, not credible. The judge now saying he never meant to suggest Nobles was a liar. In a letter today to State Attorney Melissa Nelson, the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers insisting that Nobles be put back on the list, suggesting litigation might be required otherwise to correct the decision to remove him. The state attorney's office says Melissa Nelson will be responding to the association in writing, but as of now, the officer's name has not been put back on the Brady list. We will, of course, keep you updated on this evolving story, Heather. An update now in an ongoing First Coast News investigation into a list of police officers with credibility problems known as the Brady list. By law, prosecutors must disclose when those officers are involved in a criminal case. Most officers on the list have quit or been fired, but one who was on the list until we first reported on this in February fought to get his name off the list and won, despite a judge's order finding him evasive and not credible. On Your Side's Ann Schindler has continued to track this evolving story and brings us 3 important updates.
This officer spent 4 years on the Brady list after this judge found his testimony so unreliable he threw out the case. Sergeant J.C. Nobles has always protested being on the Brady list, and after we reported on it, this chief assistant state attorney agreed to ask the judge to, quote, clarify his 2018 order. That order finding that Nobles was evasive, not credible, and, quote, completely and materially changed his sworn testimony.
He's lying, is what it said.
This attorney believes the order was unambiguous, but despite the case being 4 years old and closed, the judge issued a new opinion in April, saying he never meant to suggest the officer was lying. Prosecutors took Nobles off the Brady list. Now, this group of criminal defense attorneys is objecting. In this May 2nd letter, they demanded State Attorney Melissa Nelson put Nobles' name back on the list. She declined. In this May 24th letter, they doubled down, saying prosecutors have, quote, now taken on the role of Sergeant Nobles' lawyer, creating an inherent conflict that will require them to recuse themselves from any future case involving Nobles. The state attorney didn't respond. We also obtained the draft version of the judge's recent order. Unlike the final version, which was 2 pages and denied the request for clarification, the draft version was 16 pages and granted the request. In the draft, the judge says despite having no jurisdiction in the case, he was entering the order to, quote, explain and repeat what should have been obvious and straightforward. That claim did not appear in the final version. As of now, Sergeant Nobles remains on the street and off the Brady list. Ann Schindler, First Coast News, on your side.